Welcome to this explainer on the foundations of biogeography. Look, if you've ever stared at a map or just looked around the natural world and thought, why exactly does that animal live right there and, absolutely nowhere else? Well, you're already thinking like a biogeographer. Today, we're mapping out the hidden logic of life on Earth.
So let's kick things off with a massive spatial mystery. Why are polar bears dominating the ice up in the Arctic, but there is literally not a single one down in the Antarctic? Or, how did these giant, flightless ground beetles end up stranded on totally isolated oceanic islands? Why is the wildlife in Australia just so bizarrely unique compared to the rest of the planet? These aren't just fun trivia night questions. They're the massive global puzzles that our whole discipline is built to solve.
Here's our quick roadmap for this explainer. We'll define the discipline, split it into its ecological and historical branches, look at how it synthesizes different sciences, explore the actual mechanisms of distribution, and finally, meet the pioneers who started it all.
All right, Section 1. Defining the discipline. Now, biogeography is way more than just, making lists of where animals live. It's the hardcore scientific study of biological diversity across both space and time. We're tracking how life shifts, and that means everything from microscopic genetics to massive continent-spanning ecosystems. We're looking for that hidden underlying order and what often looks like completely random placements of life on our planet.
To really hammer home how important this is, just look to Charles Darwin. In an 1845 letter to his buddy, the botanist Joseph Hooker, Darwin actually called geographical distribution that grand subject, that almost keystone of the laws of creation. For Darwin, cracking the code of where things lived was absolutely essential to figuring out how evolution itself actually worked.
Moving on to Section 2, the ecological and historical branches.
So the field basically splits into two distinct time frames. Historical biogeography, that's the wide lens. It zooms way, way out to look at evolutionary and geological timescales, massive regions, and often extinct species. Think about how shifting continents split up dinosaur populations millions of years ago. Ecological biogeography, on the flip side, zooms right in. It looks at much shorter periods, living species, and immediate environmental constraints, like, say, how this year's rainfall is impacting a specific butterfly population on one specific mountain today.
Section 3. The interdisciplinary synthesis.
Now, biogeography does not exist in a vacuum. It's essentially this brilliant, massive mashup of two foundational sciences. On one hand, you've got biology, right? Grounded in the theory of evolution by natural selection. On the other hand, you have geology, anchored by plate tectonics. By weaving together genetics, paleontology, and climatology, biogeography gives us the whole, unified story of life on an incredibly dynamic, ever-changing planet.
You really have to think of tectonic plates as a giant geological conveyor belt. You've got spreading ridges and ocean trenches shifting these massive plates at maybe 2.5 centimeters a year, which, by the way, is roughly the speed your fingernails grow. So, yeah, it sounds agonizingly slow. But give it hundreds of millions of years, that conveyor belt literally rips continents apart, opens up brand new oceans, and completely rewrites the map of where species can actually exist.
Which brings us right into Section 4, mechanisms of distribution.
So how exactly does a shifting planet create the crazy patterns we see today? Take the total puzzle of a disjunct distribution. This is when a single group of organisms is split apart by an absolutely insurmountable barrier. A great example is the fossilized Glossopteris fern. These were massive 30-meter-tall trees, but their heavy, bulky seeds are found across South America, Africa, Madagascar, India, Antarctica, and Australia. They definitely couldn't blow in the wind across oceans, and they were way too heavy to float. So, how in the world did they get there?
Well, that brings up the two main ways things move around, dispersal and vicariance. Dispersal is when organisms actively cross an existing barrier. Birds flying across the sea, for example. Impressive, for sure. But it absolutely doesn't explain our heavy, sinking fern seeds. So that leaves vicariance. Vicariance is when a new geographical barrier, like, say, a new ocean forming, passively splits a population that used to be connected. Those ancient ferns didn't cross the ocean. Actually, the ground beneath them literally just broke apart and carried them away over millions of years.
All right, our final section, Section 5, Pioneers of Biogeography.
Of course, our modern understanding didn't just happen overnight. It was a rapid, thrilling acceleration of discovery that really kicked off in the 18th century. It started with early observations, like J.R. Forster noticing how plant diversity spikes at the equator, and it runs all the way through the 19th century with brilliant minds putting the puzzle together.
A huge, game-changing leap forward came from Alexander von Humboldt. He's known as the father of phytogeography. Humboldt traveled the globe and actually invented the isotherm, those lines on maps that connect points of the same temperature. By painstakingly mapping climate and altitude, he proved that plant distribution isn't just random chaos. Life actually fits neatly into highly predictable, climate-driven zones.
And then we have to talk about Alfred Russel Wallace. Get this. While literally bedridden with a severe fever in the East Indies, he independently came up with the theory of natural selection. But his absolute triumph in this specific field came from his obsessive mapping of the Malay archipelago. He discovered what we now call the Wallace Line, this incredibly sharp, invisible geographic border that totally separates Asian species from Australian ones. His work was so groundbreaking, he is universally recognized today as the father of biogeography.
Now, traditionally, biogeography has always relied on incredibly slow, stable environmental changes to figure out the rules of life. But today, well, rapid climate change is throwing a completely wild, volatile element into the mix. As environments shift faster than evolutionary time can keep up with, how are modern species going to adapt? Are they going to disperse? Will they face mass extinction? Or are they going to force us to completely rewrite the historical rules of survival? That is the massive puzzle the next generation of biogeographers is going to have to solve. Thanks so much for exploring this explainer with me today.